Christians to look at moral philosophers or political philosophers, even though they may not be Christian, if we look at them and we say, but they actually have a fairly decent grasp on what human beings are like, okay? Then we might say, if they have a decent grasp on what human beings are like and think fairly clearly, we might be able to use some of what they come up with, okay? Even though they may have done their philosophizing 2,500 years ago, okay? Because human nature is today what it was 2,500 years ago, and good reasoning today and then are the same, okay? Likewise, the way we view history as, you know, the sort of the conglomeration of events that human beings have engaged in, and human beings are a particular thing created by God. So we view history that way. And we Christians have no trouble viewing history sort of teleologically. In other words, with an end in mind. This is going somewhere, or it should be going somewhere and it's gone off track. See, we may very well look at history and say, we went off here. We got back closer to things there. We went off again over here, okay? This is very different than the view of history that just says history is a series of meanderings. It's not really going anywhere. So you don't really say it's better here or it's worse there. You might say I'd rather live in that time rather than in that time. But we're really not saying it's approaching anything. It just is what it is, just like the rest of evolution. All right, so this is the traditional understanding. Very quickly here, because we've talked about this. Metaphysical naturalism is the idea that everything happens according to the natural and inherent qualities in things, that there is no supernatural and there is no God reigning over all of this. When you apply that to biology, Darwinism is essentially an effort to explain the existence of life. I shouldn't say that. It's really not an explanation of the existence of life. It is an explanation or an attempt to explain the diversity of life, where the particular species on Earth came from. It really has no explanation. It doesn't even attempt an explanation for where life originally came from, although you'll never hear anybody say that. But actually, if you understand the theories, you will realize that's obviously true. At any rate, you apply naturalism to biology, and then you have to end up with something like evolution, okay? Christians don't do this. Christians say that life is a special creation of God, and the particular species, including human beings, are particularly created by God and not the product of natural processes. But if you don't believe in God, then you have to believe that it just happened all by itself. Darwinism is how you explain how we're sitting here today talking to one another all by itself. Now, it's an attempt to explain. Don't let people convince you that it is an explanation. It is not. I can't remember whether I used this example or not. Supposing that we see a row of houses all looking pretty much like the other one up a street. And I come up with the theory that a tornado came down here. And it went through those woods and gathered up all the materials. And then when it went down the street, it created one house after the next, all of them just like the last one. And when it ran out of materials, the tornado moved on, and there's our little housing tract, okay? That is an explanation, okay, that is in the sense that it is a description of how those houses got there. The tornado moves in a straight line. It rips up the trees over here. It puts them here. We see that the same wood that's out there is in here, and so on. So it has a certain explanatory power. It describes how those houses got there, but it does not explain how a tornado can do that. It just assumes that it can. Okay? It just assumes that it can. Now, that's how evolution works. It describes what we see, but doesn't explain how that could actually happen. The way people talk is it explains it. It doesn't explain it. And people who are aware of the complexities of human life today, any life, will tell you in an instant that the Darwinian explanation for this fails. we hold to it because we don't have any other explanation. Okay? We believe this tornado did this because we have no idea of what else could have done it. The only thing I've ever seen that's ever been able to move wood around is a tornado. It must have been that. So it had, even though I can't imagine how it would work. Darwinism does not explain, it just describes. Okay? But a description does not have to be accurate. And Darwinism is not accurate and does not explain how mutations and all of that can make a man out of a monkey or a squirrel out of an amoeba. It just doesn't explain that. Going further, anthropology, not by necessity, but the way it actually is conducted, essentially applies naturalism to human beings. So not just Darwinism, which explains biology of all life. Now we're looking at human life, but we're going to evaluate human life exactly the same way. Human beings came to be what we are, not just biologically, but culturally, by purely natural things. And we're going to see that this is all going to be about evolutionary adaptations. Okay, that's how we came to be. We are just, there's this penumbra, if I may use that expression, that sort of grows out of human biology, and that's called culture. And that culture, but that culture is just as much a product of evolution and random chance and so forth as anything else. And our Windows license is about to expire. Now you may wonder what this has to do with human nature, with Darwin. Yeah, that's right. All of our society is about to expire. That's what that means. Okay, well, I'm frozen until, but we're getting some help here. Now, does anybody believe that that little arrow came out and clicked that button by random chance? Or was there some intelligence behind that? Semi-intelligence is close enough. Okay. Sociocultural anthropology just takes it a step further, and rather than just looking at human beings in terms of our brains and our bodies and all of that, it takes a look at the whole broad scope of culture. Note that I say including religion, and that's very, very important because a sociocultural anthropologist is going to view religion as just one more aspect of human culture, and they're going to evaluate it exactly the same way. All right, here's what I want you to take away. Human traits, behaviors, and cultures are the natural and arbitrary products of past adaptations. In other words, just like evolution. Your fingers, okay, that you walk on 2 feet, that you are constructed the way you are, according to modern understandings of things, is the product of random past mutations and adaptations to our environment, millions of years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, and are competing with other animals for resources to eat, to live, to pass on our genes, and here we are, okay? We are here, configured this way, because that's just how it happened. The chances of where we used to live, and how we used to live, and who we used to be competing with, this is how we ended up. We could have ended up some other way. We happen to end up this way. Evolution was not aiming at anything. It wasn't aiming at us. It isn't aiming at anything beyond us. It's just meandering around wherever it goes. And if we had 1,000 other worlds like this one, it may be, then the other 999 would have all kinds of life, and none of them would be intelligent like ours. Or maybe we would find out that in every world, somebody is going to rise. Who knows? The thing is, it's not directed. And human beings are not at the apex of anything. They are not the focus. They are not the design. We are just accidentally spit up in exactly the same way as squirrels and amoeba. It's all the same. And we are no more to be preferred than any of those other things. And in that regard, PETA is absolutely right. We have no more right to eat the animals than they have to eat us. However, PETA is wrong in this. We have the capacity to eat animals, and they don't have the capacity to eat us. And so if you really want to be a Darwinist, we'll say, I'm going to eat the animals because I can. Okay? Because I can and I want to. And that's their problem. The strong will do what they want. The weak will suffer what they must. That would be an excellent example of Darwinism in action. That actually has nothing to do with Darwinism. That has to do with weak and strong nations, how they deal with one another. But nevertheless, same idea. Okay. That means that human traits, behaviors, and cultures are to some extent malleable, not immutable. They are in constant flux, and they are what they are at this particular time simply by accident. And then if you ask, what is a human being? You're going to have to ask a second question. When are you talking about? Now? 100 years ago? 1,000 years from now? Where are you talking about? Because they're all different and they're all changing. Well, what is the ideal human being? There is no ideal human being because this is just a meandering process. So we go up and we go down and we go left and we go right, and there isn't anything where you point and say, that's the ideal. And you were there for a second and now you've wandered off it again. No, there is no ideal. There is no thing called human being. It is just what we are, and then we're a collection of whatever our past spit up. Okay? No different than what a horse is or what a flea is. It's just what happened to spit up. Do you understand this? Okay? It's not very life-affirming, but it is the reigning philosophy in our society today, even though most individual people, if you would talk to them, they will not say, yes, this is what we are. But in fact, if you find out what they actually believe about the world and life, you'll find out that what they believe about the world and life actually is drawn from this idea, not a Christian worldview. Okay? They do not, and this is the point here, what human beings are, our societies, our cultures, our traits, do not arise from a fixed, immutable human nature. Much less is that human nature something created by God. Okay? So there is no relationship between the way a human being is and some ideal that God has created. And there's no relationship between what human culture is and what a human being ought to be. Okay? Because there is no God to create us, and therefore there is no model human being, and there is no model culture. And that's why when we use the word normal, what do we do with it? If we're going to use the word normal about human beings, we put it in air quotes, always. Why do we do that? Because we are acknowledging by doing that, we are virtue signaling, if you want to know the truth, that there is no such thing as normal. That everything is on a continuum, and one thing is not any better than the other, because we are all just spit up from our past. Okay? Okay, so let's talk about some important consequences of these theories that are giving rise to a lot of our flashpoints today. There are other flashpoints here, but these are the ones that are in the news a lot, or at least the ones that, even if they're not in the news, are most important for us to bear in mind. First, at the very top there, I say the notion of objectivity and truth. What do we mean by objectivity and truth? That is, that there is such a thing as something that is true. It is true even if not a single person in the world believes it. Okay? It is true because that's the way things really are. And objective means that's the way things really are. Now, the Christian worldview is deeply imbued with an idea that there is objectivity and truth. Now, when I say truth, obviously for us the ultimate truth is Jesus Christ. But before we get to that, we already have an idea that there is such a thing as truth. Well, what do I mean? I mean that there's a God, and that's not your opinion and my opinion. Even if not a single soul in all the world believed it, there's still a God. If there were no people, there would still be a God. And the God is the way God is, and it has nothing to do with how you and I believe it. God created human beings. Therefore, there is such a thing as a human nature. What is that human nature? It's what God created in his image. Now, if not a single human being on earth knows what that nature is, there is still a human nature. We know this. So we may agree that there's lots of areas of dispute where we're not sure. We're not sure what's the real human nature and what's the corrupt human nature. But even think about that. What is it? For we Christians, we speak of corrupt human nature. Can a Darwinist speak of a corrupt human nature? What is corrupt? There's no corrupt. Okay? Corrupt, we would consider a deformity, okay, to be a corruption. But to a Darwinist, deformities are the engine that drives innovation and improvement. You could call it change. Let's call it change, okay? So we can speak of an ideal human nature. For us Christians, the ideal human nature is perfectly modeled by Jesus. Other human beings are to be compared to that. And there is a thing called a human being, and this is what it ought to look like, and anything that doesn't look like that is something less than human. That makes sense for us. That is not something that a Darwinist is ever going to say, okay? We just are what we are. There's no such thing as corrupt. We don't even say not completely evolved, although sometimes they will speak that way. It's totally illegitimate. What do you mean not completely evolved? Nothing is ever completely evolved. Things just always evolve. It's just like a wheel is turning and turning and turning. Well, it hasn't quite turned to the right spot. What do you mean? It's always turning. Whenever it gets to the right spot, it's just going to keep turning. There is no right spot. It's round. Okay? All right. Evolution completely overthrows the idea that there is objectivity and truth in human culture. Okay? Now, there might be objectivity and truth in the sense that there is evolution, and this is how it worked. Okay? Science is an inquiry into the objective, true nature of what actually happened. We will see that that's disputed now, too. However, when it comes to human beings, human nature, and human culture, there is no objectivity there. Okay? If you want to measure the average height of a human being 1,000 years ago and today, there you can get something objective. But if you want to talk about which is the correct way to think about life, the way a human being in Africa or Europe or China or America 2,000 years ago or today would have thought, there is no right answer there. Everybody is thinking and processing according to their own environments and dealing with things as they can. So human nature, morality, the things that we strive for, the things that we flee from, what we consider to be the ideal human being or the ideal culture, these are none of them objective in any sense. They are just, I like my culture. In my idea, this is the way the culture ought to be, so I will criticize any culture that is not this way. However, you have a different sense for what culture ought to be. You and I may disagree. Who's to say which is right? In fact, it's ridiculous to say that either one of us is right. Culture is whatever it is. Like it or don't like it, but it is just whatever the past has spit out. Okay, notions of objectivity and truth in human culture and human nature and human thinking and moral philosophy and natural law and all of that have given way to various critical theories. What is a critical theory? And you hear about a lot of these. You hear about critical gender theory, critical feminist theory, critical various histories of various sorts. There's critical biblical theory. There's all kinds of critical, all kinds of things. Everything. The essence of critical in the critical theory is this. In the past, education was considered to be the process of passing on the wisdom of one generation to the next. And your job as a student and the professor's job as a professor was to make for a good transition. I'm going to impart on you, the next generation, the wisdom that was imparted upon me from the last generation. And so it will go, and you will pass it on to the next generation. You may make tweaks here and there to improve it here or there. You may sand off some of the rough edges and all of that. But here is the wisdom of the past. I'm giving it to you. You're going to learn it. You're going to pass it on, or you will suffer the consequences. Critical theory says we are not going to accept anything from the past as settled. The critical means we are going to look at everything fresh and new from a naturalistic, I'm going to use the word here that I probably shouldn't be using, objective. They're going to say objective, meaning that we're going to cut out all of the bias that was in your understanding of history, in your understanding of patriarchy, in your understanding of race, in your understanding of religion or whatever. And we are going to reevaluate everything, and nothing is sacred. So, if you're going to take a critical view of religion and nothing is sacred, then you have no problem whatsoever postulating that the Israelites began as a tribe of polytheists who slowly, in time, not because of a revelation of God to Abraham or being led out of Egypt, but slowly, in time, sort of evolved into this more sophisticated understanding of one God. Of course, at first it was just one God for them, and then later on they decided that there was just one God for everybody. But this took time, many, many ages, and this was the product of human culture, which was the product of just an evolutionary process in society, and there was no revelation from God. Okay? If you're going to have a critical view, then you're going to read the Bible that way. Yes?
Would a critical theory of math, would a good example of that be Common Core?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm not knowledgeable enough about what exactly is meant by common. The fear with Common Core. And I can tell you this. For all I know, Common Core in math is perfectly fine. I don't know whether it is or whether it isn't. The fear is that Common Core, if it's going to have a common origin, we're all going to have to live with this. If something like that is put forward, it's going to be imposed upon all of us. That's where the fear of that is. Because there are views of mathematics and views of science which attempt to be critical. Now, you'll find nobody that will be more laugh at these things than scientists and mathematicians. Nevertheless, there are many in our political world today who are more than happy to say that even such things as arithmetic are ultimately, spit up from the past. Okay? It's just all a part of past culture. And who's to say that 2 + 2 = 4 is any better than what another culture might decide is really a most essential way of counting. We count linearly. Well, maybe we should count circularly. I don't even know what I'm talking about now, but I could sound really brilliant in saying things, doesn't it? Sounds like we're going to count circularly. We're going to have a cyclical view of numbers, and round they go. Okay. But critical theories are the idea that we are not going to accept any of the received wisdom of the past because the received wisdom of the past has been given a sheen of objectivity and truth that it does not have. You were taught that there's such a thing as a mother and a father and a family, and that women were this way and men were that way, and you were taught that there was a certain way that these genders should relate to one another, and you were taught that that was the way it should be. But that suggests that there is a way it should be, and there isn't a way it should be. And so critical theory is going to go back and say, okay, well, it didn't have to be this way, it just was. Okay? So let's take a look at that. Well, first off, let's look at religion as a product. I've talked about this a bit. If you are going to view religion from the lens of there is no objectivity and truth, then there is only two things that can happen to all religion. Either one, it all goes away. Just lock, stock, and barrel, it goes away. It has no value. It's like believing that the moon is made of green cheese. It is the stuff of children. It is illogical and useless. It is a pure relic, like an appendix. It serves no purpose, so we get rid of it, and all we have is numbers. All we have is what we can measure and see. That's one way to do it. The problem is people will not get rid of their religion. So, and even people who try and want to get rid of it find that they cannot. You just can't live life. So the second way to do it is you subjectivize it. What do I mean by that? I mean, the way a Christian views religion is this. God has spoken. God has spoken whether anybody's listening or not. God has a will for this world. Let's put it this way. There is a kingdom. And God is at work in this world. And whether you believe it or not makes no difference. It is what God has made it to be. It is objectively true. And if you don't see it now, you'll see it when you die. And that's that. But there is no objective truth like that anymore. Not when it comes to religion. Remember, the only thing that's objectively true is stuff that you can measure. So science and numbers, that's true. But anything else is only true subjectively. In other words, this religion is your effort to impose sort of order and understanding on the world. It helps you. We need that. I've said many times, squirrels don't need this. People do need this. So we create it. So all religion now is a subjective effort to understand the universe. Now, what a Christian would say about religion is, number one, all religion, even false religion, ultimately is grounded in God's hardwiring of human beings, that a human being knows that there is something more than just numbers, and a human being is intuitively aware of the existence of God or gods or something out there, some standard, some objective truth. We know this. All human beings know this. All human beings have a conscience and know the difference between right and wrong, even if imperfectly, so that we can speak of true and false religion, or we can speak of a false religion being actually kind of close to the truth on this point, and not bad on that point, and horrible over here. We also speak of the fact that where God has spoken, there is no more room for human beings to negotiate. If God speaks, then that is the true religion. The rest of it is us groping to try to find the truth, believing that there is a truth. We are trying to find the truth, but because we sit in darkness, we miss the mark most of the time. Sometimes we get closer than others. Sometimes we get startlingly close. Sometimes we're embarrassingly far off the mark. Okay? But human beings believe very much in an objective religious truth. It's centered in God. God is active in this world. We've talked a little bit about that. That even pagans and people of false religion are still striving at something that inwardly they know exists. Okay? There's an objectivity here. Modern theory says there's no objectivity here. Human beings are just this way. It is an adaptation, a coping mechanism for human beings because of the way our brains developed, we need to have some sense that there's somebody out there watching over us, that there's some overriding purpose to life, and therefore we create these things. But they are not there. To say that they're not real, let's put it this way. They are real insofar as they are products of our mind only. Okay? So the subjectivization of all religion means that religion is a phenomenon that happens between your ears, and that's it. When the last person dies, religion dies. Because there's no real God out there. There's no real angels out there. There's no real meaning, purpose, or plan to anything. So when the last person dies, religion dies entirely. And not for the Christian. If the last person dies, God continues. Okay? Virtually all discussion of religion, just listen to it. All discussion of religion that you'll see in the public place assumes everything is subjective. You have your belief, I have mine. Right, and when it comes to religion, it's explicit. It is just absolutely explicit. You have your truth, I have mine. What's the value of religion? The value of religion is, does it help you? If your religion helps you, fine. If it doesn't hurt me. If your religion does not hurt me and helps you, then go for it. Believe whatever you want. I'm fine with that. By the way, this is as pagan can get. This is the way the Romans were. Did you know that? They were perfectly fine with that. Romans were not at war against other religions. They didn't care. They were perfectly fine to say these are all equally right, equally wrong. Doesn't matter. And the pantheon could be whatever you want it to be. They didn't care. An ancient pagan did not identify with their religion. You may think that they did, but they didn't. Their religions were not, their gods were not important to them, other than as some box you better check because you don't want to get them mad at you. But that's about it. A Christian would say, I am a Christian. And that meant a lot. That meant a huge amount about your character and life and how you viewed the world. But nobody ever said, well, they might say, I worship Athena, but that didn't mean anything. And it said nothing about your character or how you view the world or anything like that. Today, it's your deal, whatever you want. And that's the way all religion is today. But not for the Christian, or I should say, back up. Not for creedal, apostolic, orthodox Christianity. Now, if you want to, this is part of what, by the way, this is part of what allows our mainline liberal denominations to do what they do. You might say, how can the ELCA have a trans bishop? How do they justify that? Well, let me give you a clue. They do not justify that by reading carefully the Hebrew. Okay, they don't do that. They are not going back into church history and culling through the church fathers and realizing that there's this strain of theology and it's rooted in certain passages and there's a particular way of understanding the Greek or the Hebrew. They don't do that. What they do is they refer the whole thing, the whole Old and New Testament and everything that for you and me is Christianity, to the world of the subjective. But Paul says, well, yes, that's what Paul thought. And that was fine for Paul. And in his day, that worked. Okay? That's perfectly okay. But you are not bound by what Paul thought. And I might say, you're right, I'm not bound by what Paul thought, but this is not what Paul thought. Only the importance of this is what God speaks. It's just Paul's voice, and yeah, he believed it, of course, but we believe in an objective voice of God. But they would say, well, we don't know what we hear is Paul. Paul is responding to his encounter with Christ. So we may learn from Paul, from his encounter with Christ. We may learn from John, with his encounter with Christ. We may learn from all these different ones and their encounters with Christ, or their encounters with God, or whatever it is. But that's their encounter, whatever they make of it, whatever helped them. But that doesn't bind you. You have to have your own encounter with Christ, or your own encounter with God. And you have to process that on your own. You can't take somebody else's experience and impose it upon yourself. Because that's not subjective. That's objective. You're taking somebody else's view and claiming it has to be yours. No. You have to have your own authentic, legitimate encounter with God. Or God, however you conceive of him. Now, so that when we have the readings in church, in a church like that, these are here suggestions for you. These are insights into how other people have sort of processed their life with God and what they think that means by that. But we cannot impose this on you by telling you what you must believe and how you must live. Because we know that religion doesn't work that way. Well, of course, an Orthodox Christian would say, yes, it does. That's exactly the point of it. Okay? There's a huge divide. And what you have with our liberal churches, now, and when I say liberal churches, I do not mean every member of the liberal church. I mean the movers and shakers of these liberal churches. What they are attempting to do is that they are attempting to move the church as much as they can into the modern mindset, and they keep a religious veneer on it. The problem is the religious veneer won't stick to the rotten Darwin naturalistic core. But they try to make it work. They don't want to go full Monty, shall we say, and just say, you know what, there is no God. But we like getting together and singing these hymns, so we're going to do it anyway, even though there's no God. They don't do that. They stop short. But what they do is they just end up in a middle place where nobody likes them. Orthodox Christianity has no use for this. You cut a deal with the devil. You've made peace with the devil. You've done worse than that. You've become devilish. But the devil's not happy either because of all this veneer. In other words, if you're a scientist, you really don't like all this religious stuff. And if you're genuinely Orthodox, you don't like all this hedging. All right. So religion really takes it on the chin if you're going to view this from an evolutionary point of view, because religion, like everything else, is just what's spit up from the past. Now, culturally, we have the same idea that is used to attack the tradition. Even using the words traditional is troubling here. What I mean by traditional is that which has been passed down from the past and ultimately came from God. I do not mean just the stuff that society has gotten used to. Traditional understandings of marriage and family are reactions to particular circumstances in times past, many of those times very remote. Yes, they will say, there was a time when big, strong cavemen needed to drag their wives around by the hair so that they could go out and club their food and then come back and mate with their property and fight with one another. But and there was a time when that made sense. But that time is long past. We have moved beyond that. And today, there's too much toxic masculinity still left, too much caveman left in the men. And we still have too much of a desire to grab our clubs and try to have our way. And this is a relic. And the family, the traditional family, was created to exalt the male and to subject the female. Now, why was this so? Well, because once upon a time, being big and strong, or at least bigger and stronger than females, was useful. And it puts you in charge. And what could the women do? And at any rate, ultimately, everything's going to come down to fighting in wars anyway, and that means the men have a tremendous advantage. And so, if you can fight, then you get to be in the head. And that made sense. In a society where being able to fight meant that you were more valuable than somebody who could not. And what was the value of women? The value of women was having children. So we developed this family in order to exalt men so that they can be kings of their little domains, and so the women can do what they're supposed to do. And that worked well in that day and in that age when it had to be that way. And that's where our traditional family came from. It didn't come from God. It came from that. But I'm reading here in Scripture. Well, yeah, but the Scripture, you have to read the Scripture critically. That also is a legacy. Whoever wrote that thing in Genesis was as much a product of this patriarchal kind of construction, didn't know it. He didn't know it. It just seemed very reasonable to him. Of course men should be in charge. We're bigger and stronger and better in every way. It just seemed natural to him because that's what was taught to him, because that's what used to work. And so he writes it into the Scripture because, of course, it's obviously true. And now you read it today, fool that you are, and think that this is somehow not objectively true. You don't realize it's all nothing but evolution. And now what you've done is you've gotten stuck in a legacy way of doing things and thinking about things. You know, people used to stupidly think that sex should be between a man and a woman. Well, why would that be? Well, because once upon a time, having children was important. That was the reason for all of this, is to have children, because if we don't have children, well, then you don't have anybody to work the farm or hunt the animals or fight the wars, and society ends. So we've got to have children. So that's absolutely necessary. So society put no value whatsoever on homosexual activity, because homosexual activity does not produce children. It's useless. That a man should have a wife and the wife should not be able to have another man is because we need to have harmony in the tribe. We're going to use the word tribe now because I want you to think about, very primitive peoples primitive compared to our very sophisticated ways of doing things today. And we need to keep the men from beating one another up. And so they each need to have their own property. So you stay off my property and I'll stay off yours. And that means keep away from my wife because she's my property. All of this worked once upon a time, made sense. It caused human beings to flourish, but not anymore. This is the argument, folks. I'm not exaggerating anything. Not anymore. Now it's absurd to say that the man should be the head of anything. Actually, the problem with men is there's too much left of that man who's locked in ages past. Too much wrong with women, too. They are also locked in the past. And they are prisoners. We're all prisoners of these earlier ways of doing things. Critical theory, when looking at sex and family, dispenses with all what would be, to us, common sense and traditional passed down wisdom, and says, no, we have to understand all of this from the point of view of naturalism and Darwinism and anthropology and all of that. And then you see that the way family has developed is not the way, it's not rooted in human nature, rooted in God. It's just what's spit out from the past. Could have been another way. And now that we know this, we are free to make changes. Okay? What you are seeing in our society today is the liberty to make these changes because they no longer think that the way family was structured or marriage is understood or genders were understood is rooted in human nature, which is immutable because it is a special creation of God. We no longer believe that in our society today, so all things are on the table for what might be tweaked and what might be made better. Now, we might have some rip-roaring arguments, even among those who are not Christians, about exactly what family should look like then. Okay? Because after all, we Christians have an advantage. We actually have a starting point. We actually are told what a human being ought to look like, and you can kind of build on that. But if you don't have anything, if anything is possible, where on earth do you start? Well, I don't know. That's the problem our society is having today. And so you have this just, the sexual revolution was not just allowing people, lighten up and allowing people to have a good time. Nothing new in that. Absolutely nothing new in that. But it's the whole idea that sex is between a husband and a wife, married till death do them part. Well, that is a relic of a belief in objective truth in religion that just isn't true. The reality is this is just what was spit up from our, primordial past, and it doesn't serve us well anymore. It oppresses women, makes men do bad things, causes wars. Apparently men are the only one that cause wars. That's how it goes. If women were in charge, there would be no wars. This is what I'm to understand. Because women, I guess, aren't corrupt. Only men. I don't know. The whole idea of homosexuality is swept aside, you see. It's just swept aside very easily, and you and I just look like Cro-Magnon people, even though we deny Cro-Magnon is a thing. Nevertheless, it's just swept aside. Because, you see, you believe in some kind of image of God, but the reality is we're not animals and we can do what we want. We can be whatever we want to be. And exactly the same thing you have when you talk about gender. It just, when you get to gender, at this point, even many people who were all for this up until then, even some of them are beginning to balk, but not nearly as many as I might have thought. Boy, so many people are buying into this, and I'm thinking, are you nuts? Honestly. I mean, I got it. You have a different philosophy. But are you also stupid? Because I really wonder about that. But, and actually, I'll tell you what I really believe. I think very, very, very few people believe in this trans stuff. I don't think many people believe this at all. But I think everybody is scared to death to say anything. So nobody will say the emperor has no clothes. Except folks like us, but nobody's going to listen to us. Okay? Out there, nobody will say, this is stupid, this is ridiculous, and dangerous, and harmful, and ugly, and I don't want to live in this world. Nobody will say that, because if you say that, okay, you're in heap big trouble. But I don't think anybody really believes it either. Well, I won't say nobody, but almost nobody. Okay, well, listen, I'm going to quit. And I've gone too late to get any accolades, but I haven't gone so late that I'm in trouble. So let's quit right now. Lord Jesus, we thank you for your words, and we thank you for the truth. Lord, we thank you that you have given us a foundation upon which we can build not only our own personal lives, but our whole society can be built. And yet, Lord, we see the foundations of our society are truly coming unglued. Well, you are still Lord, and you reign over all, and you still call us to follow you. So help us, Lord, to understand what's really going on here, how the devil is really attacking our society, how he's really attacking us, and not be fooled, but, Lord, to stand firm in you. Amen.